Hi everybody, Levi Clay here, and today we are going to be talking about what you need to learn in order to progress from beginner through to intermediate stages in the early stages of your guitar playing. This is a question that came to me via one of my Discord users, and I will bring that up on screen for you shortly. I just want to say thank you so much for watching this video. It's a massive help if you leave a comment and hit that subscribe button. If you enjoy this content, there's plenty of educational content here on the channel, and I'm sure you will find something that you enjoy. So let's bring up that comment and take a look what David Donaldson has to ask. I would like to see a video for beginners, almost what you should be focusing on in your first, say, 3 years of playing. Kind of like a roadmap, stuff that's useful across all genres. And what does your practice routine look like? I find there's a big gap in info for folk who can play a bit but aren't advanced. Everything seems to be here's the open chords and the minor pentatonic, or it's way over my head from a technical or theoretical standpoint. So if you had to look back at how you progressed as a player, what were the biggest breakthrough moments and what things do you find benefited the most in your learning? Now, of course, this is a great question, and it really digs into the problem with learning the guitar on the internet. If you really think about what it might have been like to learn the guitar way back in the 70s, which is way before my time, of course, you didn't have access to the highway of information that is the internet, right? You couldn't just go online and search up information. And the problem with being able to have access to all this information is it is easy to flood yourself with information, absolutely flood yourself with information. Just overwhelm yourself with the sheer amount of things that you should know, the sheer amount of things you should be able to do. It's very easy to get inside your head. None of those things were really the case when you go back in the history of music. Now, of course, don't get me wrong, the internet is a fantastic thing, but you have to be in control of how much information you are feeding yourself. Overfeeding yourself information will only cause problems, and I see it time and time again with all of my Skype students. I mean, as a guitar teacher, I've been teaching professionally for over a decade now, and what you find is the sheer amount of people that contact you wanting lessons to talk about modes is astonishing, because the reality of the situation is you don't need to know about modes right now. I absolutely know you don't need to know about modes right now. And the reason I know it is because you're asking. If you're asking about it, it's because you've read about it on the internet. It's not because it's something that you need to know. So the first thing that I think is really, really important, David, in dealing with how to push yourself forward as a player, moving from the beginner into intermediate stages in those first 3 years of playing, this can't be understated. You have to work out what type of player you want to be. I know that sounds ridiculous, especially as you said, a kind of broad roadmap that could be used across all genres. But the reality of the situation is all genres aren't the same, and your needs for each genre are going to be different. Your wants as a player are going to be different, not just based on genre, but where it is that you want to end up as a musician. Of course, I know you, David. I've given you lessons, so I know a little bit more about your playing and what it is that you want to be. You obviously are very different to me in terms of your early stages of playing versus my early stages of playing. When I picked up the instrument, I very, very quickly wanted to become a teacher. I wanted to learn everything about the ins and outs of how music worked and pass that information on to other people. I wanted to help people. Now, that isn't the case for most people that pick up the instrument, which of course is absolutely fine. So when you are looking at your learning sources, you have to make sure that the sources that you're looking at are catering to your needs as a player or your wants as a player. As guitar teachers, what you tend to find, if you look around YouTube, is you will find a lot of content on technique and you will find a lot of content on theory. And if you don't want to be a technician, if you don't want to be a master of theory, then are those channels really the best thing for you? If your hero is Eric Clapton, for example, is there benefits to you watching hours and hours of Rick Beato and Adam Neely content? Probably not. There are probably better sources for you. Someone like Paul Davids is going to be a better source of information for you in terms of your needs. So I just want to lay out a few possible options of the type of player that you might be. So maybe one of your goals as a player is just to learn your favorite songs. Maybe one of your goals as a player is to become a songwriter. Maybe you want to be a technician. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be a technician. There was a long point in my life where what I wanted to do was not to treat the musical instrument as an artistic output, but as an athletic output. It was something that I wanted to use maybe more from a martial arts perspective, where I wanted to get involved in the discipline of the study and the practice and the mindset that goes with that. There's nothing wrong with that. If that's the type of player you are, then you have to focus your learning on those sorts of exercises. Maybe you want to be a teacher. There are lots and lots of ways to go about learning an instrument. Now, like I say, I'm not going to tailor this specifically to David's needs. This could be for anybody watching this video. So work out what type of player that you want to be. For me, one of the first questions that I ask every single one of my students is very simple. Who are your favourite guitar players? It's a really simple question, and there's only been a few times in my teaching career where I've had somebody come back and say, I don't know. It's very rare somebody doesn't know who their favourite guitar players are. And let's just think about this from a really logical standpoint. If your favourite guitar players are John Frusciante and B.B. King, you probably shouldn't be sitting down and learning picking patterns through a 3-note per string scale. You know what I mean? It's just not relevant to you and to your needs. Now, I'm not saying these aren't things that you can learn. You can learn these things. But as we know, there's a wealth of things out there that you can possibly learn on the instrument. Why focus your attention on something that isn't relevant to you whilst ignoring things that might be a lot more relevant to you? So work out who your favourite guitar players are. This is going to give you a rough idea of the direction that you're looking to go in. Maybe you are a broad genre kind of guy. Maybe you've got interests in the jazz world and in the blues world and in the rock world and the country world. Sounds like me. If you've got those, then you are going to be a little bit more broad, but really focusing on the genre and the types of players that you're looking to be, and then get in the mindset of what someone like that might have been through as a player. So when I talk about my own development, I would be a liar if I said anything other than I picked up the guitar because I wanted to learn to play songs. I wanted to learn to play all of my favourite songs. And for me, as a young guitar player, that was easy because I was buying Total Guitar magazine. There were tabs in there for my, the favourite popular songs of the day, but also some classic songs. And yeah, really getting in there and learning songs was a great way of helping me to develop some semblance of technique. Now, it wasn't a disciplined way of doing it, but it was a way of keeping me engaged. Let's say engaged is probably the best way of putting it. Focused on the actual task at hand, which is learning songs and enjoying picking up the guitar. You have to enjoy picking up the guitar. If you don't enjoy picking up the guitar, you are not going to pick up the guitar and you are not going to get better. So if you need to spend a couple of years really focusing on just learning songs and not worrying too much about the discipline, trust me, that discipline is going to come later. That refinement of the technique is going to come later. But sitting down for the first time in a guitar lesson and a guitar teacher saying, right, so here are the 3-note per string patterns and we have to learn this before we learn any other songs, before we learn to play anything, you are not going to achieve anything. You are going to hate the instrument in the same way that every 7-year-old kid that has piano lessons really hates playing piano, but they turn up because their parents make them turn up, and they sit there and they practice their scales to a metronome. It sucks out the fun and the energy of what it is to play a musical instrument. The guitar should be a fun instrument to play. So focusing on that side of things and the fun side of things is really, really important. So I think, like I say, genres and really focusing on the types of songs that you want to play. From there, though, I think there are 4 kind of main areas that we could really talk about. That would be theory, technique, fretboard skills, and vocabulary. So theory, technique, fretboard skills, and vocabulary. Now, theory isn't going to be for everybody. I think it's probably worth pointing out that my way of teaching, my way of thinking about education is that everything is built upon layers. Okay, so we're building solid foundations and we're building from there. We're building out, we're building a bigger house, if you like. So theory only has to go as far as you need it to go, right? But if you try and achieve something without the solid foundation, if you try and learn something that's further down the road without that solid foundation, you are going to come a cropper, as they say. So what I would suggest you work on is the C major scale. You need to know the C major scale, not how to play it. I mean, of course, you're going to learn how to play it, but what the C major scale is, what it sounds like. Can you sing the C major scale? Or can you sing a major scale, I should say? Because this is really important. Everything in music is a variation of the major scale in terms of how we describe it, in terms of how we think about it. So if you talk to me about minor pentatonic, I think minor pentatonic is 1 flat 3 4 5 flat 7. What does that mean? It's all in relation to the major scale. It's the first note of the major scale, it's the flattened 3rd note of the major scale, 4th note of the major scale, 5th note of the major scale, and flattened 7th note of the major scale. A little bit more theoretically complex, but you can't work out and really understand what that means without knowing that major scale. So you have to know the major scale. Once you've pushed through that, move forward and start looking at chords that you find in a key. You should know that chords 1, 4, and 5 in a major scale are major. You should know that chords 2, 3, and 6 are minor, and you should know that chord 7 is a diminished triad. You should know those things before moving on, because then you can start dealing in things like, okay, well, what's a chord progression in the key of C major? 1, 6, 2, 5. C major, A minor, D minor, G major. Learning that and knowing that and being able to work that out, more importantly, is a great way of working on the mind. And then finally, in that theory section, you might then start looking at keys, thinking about keys and how to work out what notes are in different keys. This is useful for transposing that information. It's one thing to know that a 1-6-2-5 in the key of C is C major, A minor, D minor, G major, but knowing a 1-6-2-5 in the key of E, I need to know what notes are in the key of E and therefore what chords are in the key of E to say it's E major, C sharp minor, F sharp minor, and B major. Bit of hesitation there. So yeah, theory is an interesting aspect because, like I say, what we're dealing in there is just the mind. There's no playing involved in learning theory. That's application, that's fretboard skills. And I think that a huge part of developing as a player involves knowing and understanding the mind side of things, thinking about music. There are the applications and then there's the understanding, the thinking. To me, that's where the theory side of things comes in. So from there, if we talk about fretboard skills, well, this is where we start to apply a little bit of that theory. You should know your basic caged chord forms, and I'm talking about both the open positions of those open chords, the C, A, G, E, and D forms, and you should know what they look like in their barred forms. This is really important because in the long run, this is going to help you deal with harmony. I'm not a caged-based player. I'm a derivative caged-based player, but everything fits on the fretboard in a form of visualization. My method only really deals in 3 of these positions, what I call undeniable neck geometry. My students know all about that, of course. Now, that's triad-based harmony, and I visualize everything based on triad-based harmony, but I would be a liar if I didn't say that there's relevance in the caged forms, because everything I play could be seen as fitting into one of those forms. Everything you play could be seen as fitting into one of those forms. It's the most basic way of visualizing the neck, and it's tried and tested. It works. It works for rock players, it works for jazz players. It is worth knowing these chord forms, because over time you're going to start building scales in these positions, arpeggios in these positions. Once you've learnt those forms, you need to know the relationship between these and the pentatonic patterns. There are 5 caged forms, there are 5 pentatonic patterns. Do you think there's a correlation between that information? There's no point just knowing it, just knowing that there must be a correlation. You should understand the correlation between those things. One of the things I see all the time is 3-note per string players, let's say evangelists, who will tell you that the cage system is rubbish. And then you say to them, okay, well, play me some pentatonic stuff. And they play 5 positions of pentatonics, because of course they do. It's logical to play 5 positions of the pentatonic scale. They don't understand the correlation between those things. And it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing, that kind of Dunning-Kruger thing that you will see. Why not understand these things? Because if you understand the correlation between those things, you'll start to see some of the values in maybe some of the things that you put aside. And then, of course, moving on in fretboard skills, the 3-note per string patterns. Now, this is a little bit more technical in terms of demanding on the instrument. I would maybe recommend that side of things for the players that are wanting to become technicians, because the 3-note per string system is a very efficient way of fingering scales on the guitar. It's absolutely fantastic for speed, and essential, some would say, for speed. And yeah, of course, 3-note per string that's how I grew up learning to play the instrument. A big fan of Joe Satriani. I learned my 3-note per string patterns. Big fan of all of that, Paul Gilbert and Steve Vai. The 3-note per string thing, shrapnel playing, if you like, was what I grew up on. So 3-note per string is part of my musical DNA. It is essential that you know these things if you want to be that certain type of player. Next, I just want to talk briefly about technique. Now, when it comes to technique, we're talking about beginners to intermediate players here. Technique is something that you can very, very easily become lost in as a guitar player. So many guitar players get lost in the struggle of learning about technique on the instrument. And there are some wonderful resources out there. Of course, we talk about the internet and it being the information superhighway. If you go and look at something like Troy Grady's website, Cracking the Code, you look for all the Cracking the Code stuff. This is so in-depth that it's very easy to become distracted by it. Now, let me be super clear on this. I love Troy Grady's website. I do a lot of work for Troy. I absolutely love the material that he's making, but it works more for me as a teacher and the understanding the mechanics of how the body works and how to teach picking technique and help people understand their technique than it would for you, a beginner. So using resources like that may be not so useful to you. Technique is a broad subject. You can be learning about, picking technique, hybrid picking, economy picking. You can be dealing in tapping patterns. There's so much that you can learn. Legato techniques and swibrid picking. All these things that can be traps, if you like, for confusing you or taking your time away from the things that you really need to be working on. So what I would say for the beginner moving into intermediate player is put almost everything out of your mind apart from alternate picking. Put everything out of your mind apart from alternate picking. Alternate picking is going to be the bedrock on which you will build everything else technically in the long run. And I say this as somebody who learned the hard way. I moved on from alternate picking into economy picking way, way too early in my playing. And I became an extremely proficient economy picker, but there are times where you need to alternate pick on the guitar, and my technique was severely lacking in that area. So alternate picking is down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. And, I've got lots of lessons on the subject of what I mean by strict alternate picking. This is a deep subject, but at its core, just dealing with being able to have your hand move down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up without thinking about it is really, really important. So dealing in alternate picking, you can break it down into some kind of technical subsections, if you like. You can work on 2-note per string picking, which will be pentatonic picking. You can work on 3-note per string picking. These both fall under the category of what I would call pattern picking. Now, there's nothing wrong with these. Absolutely nothing wrong with these. I spent a long time working on Troy Stetner's book, Speed Mechanics for Lead Guitar, when I was younger. Great book, and really breaks all that information down in a lot of detail and depth. And when you do that, you start dealing in string crossing mechanics and how these things work. But it's still very much pattern picking. That's fine because it's a kind of structured way of working on the technique. But in the long run, you want to be able to move away from pattern-based picking and be able to alternate pick anything that you need to play. So being able to alternate pick arpeggios, banjo roll type things. Alternate pick like a bluegrass player. That's what I, always want to suggest to people. You want to have the alternate picking technique to be able to alternate pick like a bluegrass player. If you can alternate pick like a bluegrass player, there is almost nothing that you won't be able to tackle on the guitar. We don't want to put ourselves in these technical boxes. So technique, just focus on your alternate picking. Trust me, it's going to be really useful for you. Finally, vocabulary. And what I'm going to say for vocabulary, very simple. Vocabulary. Music is a language. I cannot stress that enough. Music is a language. And in order to play music that people can enjoy, people will understand, you have to be able to speak to them in a language that they will understand. It really is as simple as that. You cannot form a musical career where everything you play is out of key. It won't work. Why? Because people don't understand the language that you're playing. If they don't understand, they can't hear what you're playing and relate to it somehow, it's no use to anybody. Now, that's not strictly true. There's definitely a school of thought where there's a lot of fun in that side of things. But generally speaking, music is a language, and you need to know the language in order to be able to communicate with people. Think of learning Spanish. You don't learn Spanish by reading a dictionary. It's not how you learn a language. You have to learn a few things in order to learn a language. But one of the most useful things that you're going to have to learn when learning a language is reading a phrase book. You're going to learn how to order a beer. You're going to have to learn how to introduce yourself, say what your name is. You are going to have to learn how to ask which way to the bus. These are phrases, and learning phrases is an important part of learning to speak a language, because then as you start to learn grammar and you start to learn how sentences are formed, you start to have a better understanding of why those phrases make sense. But you need to know those phrases first. You have to lead, if you like, with the language. Very important. Language. So this kind of brings us full circle. You need to be learning songs. And now, not necessarily full songs, because it can take a lot of time. But when you learn songs, especially by the people that you love, you're going to be learning how they use the language, how they use the instrument, how they use scales, how they use arpeggios. The answer to that might be not very much, but you will be learning how they do those things. And you will be doing it in the most important way, which is a subconscious way. You will be learning the sound of things. Remember, music is sound. And if you are not learning how things sound, if you are not training your ears, you ain't training shit. You are wasting your time. Your ears are so much more important than your technique. Your ears are so much more important than theory knowledge. Your ears are so much more important than your fretboard navigational skills. Your ears are your key to achieving everything that you want in music, because there are so many great players out there that have no technique, no theory, no fretboard skills, but they make music that will stand the test of time. Hopefully that has been useful for you. Of course, there are resources that I would point you in the direction of. YouTube is a scary place. I don't know if YouTube would be where I would start you off. But checking out maybe Justin Guitar by my good friend Justin Sandico, checking out Justin's website, there's lots of free guided courses on how to develop as a player. Justin makes incredible material, and there's a reason he's as successful as he is. So check out Justin's website. Lastly, and I have been talking a while, but lastly, I just want to say a huge thank you to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon. And of course, thank you to David Donaldson for giving me this question and inspiring me to make some content, because of course I've been busy transcribing and YouTube's been a little bit lacking just recently. But thank you so much, guys. Names are scrolling. You're incredible people. It really does help, especially in these trying, weird lockdown times. If you would like to join me over on Patreon and get access to my private patron-only Facebook group, link is in the description. Alternatively, you can check out one of my many books available on Amazon, or if you really want to help the channel, get a free trial to piano, link in the description. Thank you so much for checking out this video, guys. If you have any questions about this rambling that I've done here, please do let me know in that comment section below. I am happy to engage with you in those comments. Hit that subscribe button, and I will see you for another lesson soon. Goodbye.